This podcast is brought to you by the Pontiac Summit. The Pontiac Summit is happening in New York City on October 8th at beautiful Lavon Midtown on 42nd Street. The folks at Pontiac invite you to join the third annual Pontiac Summit, as they'll be bringing together the brightest minds in the industry. There will be engaging panels, interactive networking, and the marquee event will be Ad Tech Jeopardy, hosted by none other than me, Ari Paparo. Get your tickets at pontiac.media and use code MKT60 for 60% off your ticket until September 20th. Pontiac Intelligence is a DSP focused on custom bidding algorithms and low-tech fees. Learn more at pontiac.media. Welcome to Marketecture, where you can get smart fast with in-depth interviews of leading technology executives. I am Ari Paparo. I am joined today by David Cole, the CEO of Symitri, a pretty new company with a long background. David, thank you for being here.
Oh, it's a pleasure, and thanks for having me.
As a disclosure, I am a minor investor in Symitri. So, David, what is Symitri and how did it come about? You have an interesting origin story.
So, Symitri, the core platform we call Prism. So, Symitri Prism is an integrated privacy firewall and real-time data clean room for the open internet. That's a mouthful. So the origin story, the how this came about, is because there's this tension between data protection on one side and data accessibility on the other. And that tension got a lot stronger when you heard all the noise around third-party cookie deprecation, mobile ID deprecation, of course, all the privacy laws that are coming out in the United States and GDPR abroad. So you got this tension. And publishers and advertisers who have direct consumer relationships have come to realize that they're sitting on this pool of really valuable consumer data. And they don't want to give it away. They don't want to keep pushing it out through the bid stream like they've been doing for the last 15 or 20 years. And so the ask was, could we figure out a right in the middle between this data protection and data accessibility within the programmatic ecosystem the way it works today? And that's what we do. We enable real-time deterministic addressability, real-time measurement at the speed, scale, and cost parameters required for the open internet, while no one has to share data with any other party.
That's really interesting. We'll go into some depth on that. As a starting point, though, the company was formed by a merger of two different entities and has been around for a while under a different name. So give us the corporate history.
We started the business as TrustX. It's actually 8 years ago on September 26th.
Right. 8-year-old startup.
Yeah, 8-year-old startup. We were previously owned by a nonprofit trade association, Digital Content Next, and funded by 30 premium content publishers. And we've been doing the FSP business. That's what we are. We're a media exchange in the name of trust, transparency, and safety. And we're all those things to a fault. And it's been pretty successful. Our publishers really like what we're doing. We have lots of brands buying through us. And whenever there are these bad things that happen in programmatics, they always call TrustX as like the A and the A/B test. So we're proud of that. And the genesis of Symitri started with us and one of our partners, Akamai, I think you may know as high security and high speed. We said we're going to try to solve this problem that I just mentioned. So Symitri is the outgrowth of TrustX and the partnership that originally started with Akamai.
Okay. And then you raised money to bring these two companies together.
Yeah, I want to be clear. I wouldn't say we brought them together. I mean, Akamai is a $4 billion public company.
I was about
like a little rounding error. But in order to commercialize what we had built together over the last few years, we realized we were never going to be able to do it as TrustX. I mean, I love what we're doing, but we were kind of like this little tiny nonprofit. So we raised capital in order to take the core of what today is Symitri's Prism product and commercialize it, grow it into something that's world-class.
And did Akamai actually spin out any of its employees or its tech, or is it more of a license?
We didn't take any of the employees, but we have a license to some tech that we originally created together and rights to build on top of it, which we fully own.
And they're an equity owner in the company.
And they're also an equity owner. And we use their security services to protect data and their massive edge cloud computing infrastructure for the speed to operate it at the speed of programmatic.
Sure. And so how much did you raise and how big is the company now?
So we raised $5 million in May. When we closed capital, we were 7 employees at TrustX. We're now 14. So we've doubled the size of the company, and we're probably going to put a few more employees on the books before the end of the year as we go from beta to commercial launch.
Right, and my incredibly small check is in that 5 million, swimming along with the giants.
It was meaningful, and I really appreciate, despite the size, the meaningful nature of your investment.
Well, I'm not going to take it easy on you, though. Okay, the way I think about this product is it's like a clean room on the RTB wires. That's kind of a dumbed-down version of it. So tell me if I'm wrong, because it is hard to understand. Instead of sending in clear text, hashed emails, IDs, and things like that, you're matching it in the cloud somehow. Is that how it works? You can tell I do a lot of diligence on my investments.
It's totally magic. We've got a little genies in the back room making this all happen in real time.
Take me through it let's do life of an ad. Publisher side first. Okay, so there's a tag on the page, a header bidding tag, and then what happens?
Yeah. Let me start actually from the advertiser side, because that is actually the first distinction.
Okay.
Traditional clean rooms, InfoSum, Snowflake, right? We know the major brands. They're actually pretty good with privacy and data protection. I mean, I don't want to knock them at all. But every client that we talk to that's using these services said they're really effective when you're talking about large direct buys. They're heavy, they're complex, and they're tuned. They're designed for the sort of like put all your data in the middle, let's massage it for a bit, and then we'll come out with some synthetic IDs, load them in the ad server, boom, and then at the end we'll be able to put more data back in the middle and massage it and do some measurement. It's fine if you're, spending $100 million on a campaign, the economics and the speed, that probably all makes sense. The problem is two things. Number one, if you're the rest of the open internet that can't afford to really engage with the traditional clean rooms, you don't have a good privacy product. So that's the first thing we tried to solve. And the second is all that stuff takes a lot of time, and programmatic's real time. So we wanted to solve that. So we don't start with the publisher side. We start with the advertiser side. When an advertiser says, here's my list, and let's make it up. Let's say it's JetBlue Airlines and they want to do a targeting to their TrueBlue loyalty members. There might be 1 million loyalty members on the list for this target. That's our starting point. And yeah, we load them up. We might load them up as ramp IDs. They might be UIDs. They might be hashed emails, but they're identifiable data points that the advertiser gives us. And we put them through the Akamai security, so there's serious encryption, and they're loaded into Symitri in a database exclusively for that advertiser and that campaign. That's the starting point.
In the cloud, in the edge, really, not the cloud, the edge, the Akamai servers. So it's kind of decentralized.
Yeah. For the purpose of today, we don't have to go into every bit of the architecture, but yes, it's on the edge. It's ready to be used.
Okay, my data's there.
Right. And then on the pub side, it's all real time. We have a real-time data module. Today it's in pre-bid. We'll have it in SpringServe and Publica. Like all the header functions, we'll have a real-time data module. And that real-time data module reads from the publisher any identity they're willing to pass to us in key value pairs. So back to the JetBlue example, let's say they're ramp IDs, right? Because that's how they did it. We're going to get ramp IDs from publishers, and we do a real-time lookup. We say, is the person behind this ad on JetBlue's list? And if the answer is yes, we take that ad request, we push back data through the RTD module that says this ad request belongs to JetBlue, and we'll remove all the personal data. And then JetBlue can buy that because they'll be buying a deal ID that gets provisioned by each SSP that can catch that segment ID that we send them. No personal data. It's anonymized because everybody who's on JetBlue's list gets pushed to the same deal ID.
But you said SSP. Did you mean DSP?
SSP and DSP. So we actually, because we're the real-time data module sitting with the publisher, when we fire back to the publisher that this user's in they don't know it's the JetBlue segment, but segment ID 12345, they push that into all their SSPs, and there's a deal ID waiting for segment 12345 that JetBlue knows how to buy, and that gets pushed out to the DSP.
Okay, that's interesting. So in order to transact using this technology, they don't need to use the old TrustX pipes.
Correct. Right? TrustX will be one of many ways in which publishers can monetize their privacy-safe addressable inventory.
Right. So take me through why this solution is better than a sidecar that an SSP has that's doing, live ramp ID lookups or things like that.
Yeah, it's a great question. The primary reason is because Ari invested. But separate from that.
Yeah. I have 8 shares of OpenX, so I'm on both sides of this equation.
Look, there are lots of different privacy enabling solutions in the market. And whether it's a ramp ID through Sidecar, whether it's using UID or an ID5 or any new synthetic ID, the fundamental challenge with those IDs is that in order for them to be activated, lots of companies in the bid stream need to be able to unwrap the wrapper. They need to decrypt the ID. They need to get back to something stable. In the case of LiveRamp, it's a stable ramp ID. And each of those times that someone in the bid stream unwraps the data, that's a moment when the publisher or advertiser or both risk another party getting value out of that instead of themselves, or taking command of that data to enable something that's not desirable. For example, in the publishers who would like to be able to sync with RAMP, but are concerned about their data, we know that when the demand side knows how to reach David more cheaply, they're going to probably buy David more cheaply. And that's enabled when multiple parties can decrypt the envelope around the RAMP ID. Symitri simply prevents that. It's impossible because there's never an ID in the bed stream of any sort.
Right. So in this case where the header goes to you, you respond with IDs, deal IDs, basically. Mm-hmm. You give them to an exchange like a Magnite or PubMatic or whomever. Are you expecting them to strip out the raw IDs in that case? Or are they still going to be passing the raw IDs?
So in the early days, what they get from us will have no identity in it.
Right. But they'll get it from the publisher.
But they'll get it, exactly. They'll get it from all the other ways in which publishers send them raw IDs. Mm-hmm. And we've talked to a number of the publishers that are going to be in our beta. We have some very large publishers that are in who have said, if this thing works and it works at scale, we'll stop sending our other IDs. I had lunch with, I don't want to say names because I'm not sure this is public information, but I had lunch with a well-known publisher that has a high authentication rate. And the person in the operations role that controls this stuff turned off synchronization of RAMP and UID, and they're losing some money. And it's a little painful, but they're aware of the long-term data leakage and commoditization effects. And they're chomping at the bit to get started with Symitri because they actually want to re-enable them, but just without the data leakage problem.
Yeah, this strikes me as a positive for SSPs because they'll get signals that the buyers want, but a negative for DSPs because DSPs don't really like curation in the first place. They don't like just getting deal IDs. They want all the data. Is that a good way to think about it?
If all we were doing is what I've described thus far, I do agree. There's always winners and losers. And in this case, I could see the angle from the DSP saying, oh, I'm just a bidder. But we have an entire measurement module. We do operational measures, we call it performance measures and strategic measures. And the intelligence that comes out of that is also real time. So real time cross-publisher frequency capping and actually cross-media frequency capping because we know which raw ID was actually the one that saw the ad. We can edit who's in the cohort, who's in the group when a consumer takes an action on an ad. So if this is, say, classic retargeting and you buy this sneaker, won't follow you around anymore. We can do real-time pacing. And all that feedstock, all the data associated with that actually has to come back into the DSP because that's where the advertiser is provisioning the campaign and that's where the advertiser is expecting to see all this performance information. So the targeting alone, we're just presenting a deal ID. Although we're not the only ones doing that. The measurement comes right back into where the brands want.
So on the measurement side, are you getting a closed loop that you know who won the auctions?
So Symitri receives the win notification, and we have a piece of code. We call it the secure ad ID. It's an encrypted envelope. And in that envelope, we know, so we use a tokenization technique. It's common security. We know the token of the publisher's version of that ID. So if it's David at Gmail, I have a different token for every entity that we do business with. We know that David at Gmail's token saw that ad when I was on, say, the Washington Post or NBC.
Right.
And every time we see that token, we have some data about the ad that token saw, so we can increase the frequency cap, et cetera. And we push those back into the center using that Akamai cloud infrastructure to be able to align exposure data at the raw ID level.
So the advertisers aren't just giving you their data to match. They're able to control some level of delivery through your system as well.
They give us a frequency cap. We're not controlling pacing, but we're providing the pacing data back so that the DSP control pacing. And we'll eventually have attribution data. And again, I don't want to be an attribution company. We'll supply attribution back to the attribution vendors that the buyers want. Our goal is to sort of slide into the ecosystem to provide this real-time clean room capability and then enable the providers of applications on top of the data still do what they do, but in real time.
Got it. How far along are you in signing up SSP and DSP partners?
We've had 2 SSPs thus far ask us to integrate with them, and the integration is incredibly easy. All these SSPs can receive a segment signal of some sort, like a seller-defined audience signal. And so we're sending them a signal that they're already used to receiving. SSPs are also able to provision deal IDs across their DSPs. So none of this is new tech. We just slide in.
Right.
So 2 have already said, yes, let us know how quickly we can get up and running. And of course, there'll be TrustX, so that's 3. And we're in discussions with 2 smaller DSPs right now who really see the value in it because of the ability to match on data they might not themselves match on.
Right. You don't really need the DSPs, though. You just need the SSPs.
I don't want to say it that way. We need the SSPs because it's a real-time data module coming from publishers. We need to deploy the segments into the supply side of the exchanges. But the DSPs buy the media and the advertising, all the instructions, all the pacing data, all the budgets, everything is provisioned in the DSP.
Right.
So I think we need both. And I think that there's a value of having Symitri resident as a checkbox, as a button in both. The advertiser should be able to provision their audience the way they do it today, which is primarily in the DSP ecosystem. And instead of having to do something separate, they just hit a button that says, I'd like to symmetrize this.
Really? Symmetrize?
That's a new verb, by the way. It's not yet in the dictionary.
Yeah. Keep working on that. Have you run any campaigns yet?
No, we are running load testing at this moment, making sure that all the pipes are working at the speed that we were getting during an earlier proof of concept that we did as TrustX and Akamai. The next step is we will then push through buying. There will be no cost to anybody who's involved. So there'll be buying coming through us on a very small scale. And then we'll increase that scale gradually during the 4th quarter as we roll out the frequency capping capability, which is our key first measurement product.
Interesting. And what's the business model? Who are you charging?
We're charging both advertiser and publisher because we are protecting both their data assets. And we charge when Symitri wrapped deal ID is an actual ad transaction. It'll be a small CPM rate for both parties.
CPM rate for both parties. So it won't be a bid reduction. You'll be sending a bill at the end of the month?
No, we'll do it within the bid stream, but we're aiming for a fixed CPM. It doesn't cost us more or less to clear CTV inventory versus display inventory. And, you probably remember from TrustX, we're not in it to rob the industry. We're in it to provide a really valuable privacy data protection and measurement service.
Well, that kind of brings up a question. TrustX was it a nonprofit or was it a B Corp?
TrustX was legally a public benefit corp. We were owned by a nonprofit, and we operated as if we were a nonprofit. We couldn't actually register as a nonprofit because of the way the federal nonprofit rules work.
But Symitri is not.
No, Symitri is a for-profit,
rapacious capitalist.
Yeah, well, I'm still the same guy. Like, the leadership team didn't change.
Yeah, so nice guys who are rapacious capitalists who are protecting your privacy. All right, let's go through the lightning round. Relatively quick questions, quick answers. What's your number one competitive advantage?
Real time. Everything is real time, and it's also at a cost that's consistent with how programmatic advertising works.
What's your biggest market challenge?
The marketing community hasn't been burned in the past by the effect of data leakage. Publishers have. Like, they get it. They need to protect that data. Very few marketers have experienced what happens when their most valuable audience data is sold to competitors. And there's a little bit of an education there. So that's our biggest challenge.
Question I ask everyone, so don't take it personally. Why won't Google just crush you?
I think that there's a real problem with independence with Google. And let me say it differently. When Sandbox was coming out, of course, everyone felt like, oh my God, I have to test this thing. There's a lot of noise about giving more keys to the kingdom. to Google. They have an interest in the data, and a lot of data companies have interest in the data. Symitri is completely independent. We have no data business. We'll never own data. We are a data processor, not a controller. We'll never create data graphs. Nothing. We provide a service that enables a buyer and seller to reach one another without sharing data. Period. Story.
One thing you just said is interesting. Do you think it's possible? You don't do business in Europe currently, is that correct?
Currently, but very soon will. We built this from the ground up, thinking about the GDPR regime and consent and how to deal with data in Europe.
Because theoretically, your solution could reduce the amount of consent that a user needs to give for their data. I say theoretically, because you probably would still have to remove IP addresses and some other things. We
do. The thing is, there's this toothpaste out of the tube phenomenon in the way data works today. When you pass data in the bid stream, use your metaphor. The genie's out of the bottle. The toothpaste is out of the tube. You can't put it back in. With Symitri, if somebody changes their mind and changes consent, it's instant. They get just remove them from the target list or the cohort or whatever you want to call it, and the data never left premise in the first place. Advertiser keeps their data. Publisher keeps their data. It's a singular relationship between the consumer and the first party with whom they are doing business. There's nothing spit out into the bid stream. It's a much more secure way of handling it. And if you're motivated by privacy compliance and protection on the legal side, we think this is a gem.
Right. In the transparency control framework, you could be asked to give consent to 200 vendors. In theory, it could be one vendor, which would be you, and then no one else would get any private data.
Correct. We are the service provider to the business that collects the data, and the buck stops with us.
All right, last question. If Symitri was an animal, what animal would it be?
Oh, I knew you were going to ask me one of these funky questions.
I always ask this question. I can tell you don't listen to my podcast.
No, I do. I just listened to one actually 2 days ago to prepare myself for this, and I forgot that's the last question you asked. I think it's an octopus.
Okay.
It's an octopus for two reasons. One is they're very prescient animals. They're smart, and they have tentacles that go out. So you sort of start with everything in the center, and we spread it across the open internet in a very smart and thoughtful way. So I did think about it. I just, was like, oh yeah, I didn't really have it on top of my head.
Tentacles on the edge. I like where this is going. All right, David Cole from Symitri, thank you so much for joining us.
Pleasure. Have a great rest of the day.
Thanks for listening. New interviews are added every week at marketecture.tv and your favorite podcasting app.
Thank you for listening to the Marketecture Podcast. New episodes come out every Friday, and an insightful vendor interview is published each Monday. You can subscribe to our library of hundreds of executive interviews at marketecture.tv. You can also sign up for free for our weekly newsletter with my original strategic insights on the week's news at news.marketecture.tv. And if you're feeling social, we operate a vibrant Slack community that you can apply to join at adtechgod.com.